one of Canada's most valued natural resources.
We have millions of gallons of water pouring down from the north with the snow caps in Canada and all pouring down. And they have essentially a very large faucet.
Trump threatened to tear up the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. Water, already a precious commodity, is increasingly a point of contention between Canada and the U.S. President Donald Trump has publicly mused about diverting Canada's water to the U.S.
To help the drought-stricken United States, Donald Trump has made the startling new demand that Canada reroute its freshwater. Prime Minister Mark Carney is standing his ground at the border as Americans are still in shock over the news. The strain on Washington's lakes, rivers, and survival is growing. Trump is now demanding access to Canada's water as if it were just another commodity. After igniting a trade war weeks ago with broad tariffs on steel, lumber, and automobiles, his demand is appending decades of trade stability and fracturing treaties. Carney, a populist politician who was formerly a central banker, has emerged as the symbol of opposition. He promises to block America at the border and declares the U.S.-Canada relationship to be broken. Trump intensified his campaign just hours before, calling Canada's rivers a giant faucet that ought to be open to relieve the droughts in the United States. He specifically targeted the Columbia River, 2,000 kilometers long, with 800 flowing through British Columbia, as a potential pipeline to dry states like California. Meanwhile, Washington halted the 1961 Columbia River Treaty, endangering decades of collaboration on hydroelectric and flood control projects. According to Ottawa officials, 85 organizations support environmental and indigenous groups calling for complete protection of Canada's freshwater sovereignty. Carney has responded sharply, stressing that Canada is not for sale and that the U.S. has no authority to auction off its rivers. The world is now seeing a high-stakes clash. Trump pressing for water, Carney denying, in a critical treaty in limbo. The consequences for the U.S. are immediate. Trump's plan has backfired despite the White House's portrayal of it as a lifeline for states affected by drought and pressured industry, already in danger. Western nations like California, Arizona, and Nevada have relied on Canadian water to keep food prices stable and maintain crops. Growers now have to deal with dry canals, less irrigation, and growing uncertainty as a result of Carney's rejection. California alone provides roughly 40% of America's veggies and two-thirds of its fruits and nuts. Supermarket costs are skyrocketing in the absence of fresh supply, and before the year is out, double-digit rises are predicted for basics like tomatoes, lettuce, and almonds. The effects are not limited to agriculture. Trump has also presented water as vital to industry, including energy facilities in the Rockies and Pacific Northwest, semiconductor operations in Arizona, and hydro-dependent manufacturing in the Midwest. Massive, continuous water supplies are necessary for these operations, and shortages quickly reduce output, raise expenses, and lead to layoffs. One chip plant can use 10 million gallons of water a day, according to analysts. Factories are increasingly limiting water, shortening shifts, and warning of delays that cascade into electronics, vehicles, and defense manufacturing. The White House had promised that Canadian river diversions would protect supply chains, but instead, U.S. workers are preparing for cuts. The manufacturing belt states of Michigan, Ohio, and Wisconsin are already dealing with furloughs and delayed orders. Once at the center of Trump's economic plan, water-intensive industries, like steel and automobiles, are now facing a scarcity that tariffs and threats cannot resolve. The strain on the energy sector is comparable. In order to compensate for low water levels during heat waves, hydroelectric plants in the Pacific Northwest have relied on Canadian reserves. Due to historically low reservoir levels, utilities are relying more on natural gas and coal, which raises household costs and impedes the shift to cleaner energy. Costlier and dirtier stopgaps are being forced by America's inability to secure imports. Political repercussions are severe. Trump framed water access as a test of national strength and presented it as evidence that the United States should never come out as weak or reliant on its neighbors. He wanted to appear powerful. Therefore, he demanded Canadian water. Rather, he has been cornered and, to many, humiliated by Ottawa's rejection. Washington insiders saw Trump's accusation that Canada is keeping rivers that should flow south as an overreach and an attempt to seize something that is not rightfully America's. Communities along the Great Lakes, which once relied on cross-border agreements to maintain stability, are particularly affected. Trump's threat to quit the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement has broken that confidence for 40 million people who rely on the lakes for drinking water. Cities ranging from Chicago to Cleveland now risk the dissolution of long-standing agreements, making the greatest freshwater system in the world susceptible to political scheming. The markets are responding as well. Water scarcity is being taken into account by Wall Street when calculating risk, and investors are penalizing businesses that rely too much on inexpensive, plentiful supplies. Following Carney's denial, agribusiness equities fell sharply, and analysts caution that manufacturing and technology may follow. In an environment where every gallon counts, uncertainty translates straight into volatility. Food, cars, gadgets, and utilities will all cost more for consumers as a result. Another harsh fact brought to light by Carney's disobedience is that America no longer makes all the decisions. For a long time, Washington believed that Canadian resources were a safety net that would be there in times of need. That presumption has been abandoned. Carney has demonstrated that Canada is prepared to forego immediate financial hardship in return for long-term sovereignty. The more he resists, the more weaknesses in the United States are exposed. The number of fatalities is rising. Water-dependent industries are experiencing a wave of layoffs. Engineers in Arizona's computer sector, farm workers in California, and Midwest factory workers are all preparing for uncertainty. Political pressure increases with each job loss. Communities feel deceived by Trump's agenda, which originally promised relief. Town halls are erupting in anger. Governors are calling for answers, and both party lawmakers are putting pressure on the White House to provide answers. The crisis is no longer abstract to average Americans. Water bills are rising, grocery costs are climbing, and energy prices keep edging higher. Families in areas affected by drought are concerned about how long their taps will last. Manufacturers think about shifting operations abroad, while farmers ponder abandoning land. All of this contributes to an increasing sense of unrest that Washington has been unable to control. At its foundation, the situation is simple. Trump wants Canada's water to protect U.S. prosperity. Canada refused. The United States is now confronting a wave of economic, political, and social fallout that no rhetoric can mask. Trump's once promised giant faucet is still firmly closed, upending America's long-standing presumption that it will have access to Canadian resources. The longer the standoff lasts, the more the United States' reputation suffers both at home and abroad. For miners in West Virginia, steel workers in Ohio, farmers in California, and families across the Midwest, the message is unavoidable. Without Canadian collaboration, America's water future is uncertain. Its industry is unstable, and its leadership challenged. Water has suddenly become the most strategic commodity in the world, notwithstanding the spectacle of Trump's demand and Carney's denial. The 20th century was defined by oil. In the 21st, countries are squabbling over, battling for control over, and stockpiling water. For many years, the United States relied on Canada's abundant supply, which accounted for almost one-fifth of the world's fresh water, as a backup in case of shortage. Now that delusion has been dispelled, the ramifications extend well beyond Washington and Ottawa. Water insecurity is influencing geopolitics globally in ways that are reminiscent of previous energy crises. Disputes already rage over control of key flows from the Euphrates to the Mekong. Trump has unintentionally increased Ottawa's role by putting so much pressure on it, turning it from a silent supplier to the U.S. economy to a gatekeeper of one of the most important commodities in the world. With water shortages posing existential threats in Europe and Asia, as well as Washington, this change increases Canada's clout. This shift is demonstrated by the Columbia River Treaty. When it was signed in 1961, it was hailed as a model of collaboration that balanced Canadian hydroelectric revenues with U.S. flood protection. It received little attention for decades. Trump's decision to halt its renegotiation has now turned into a global signal that the most powerful country in the world is prepared to break a water-related agreement that dates back 60 years. Both allies and adversaries are coming to realization that new alliances must be formed and that treaties can no longer be taken for granted. Once coveted for minerals, oil, and lumber, Canada is now prized for the resource that no economy can function without. The situation is further exacerbated by the Great Lakes. This watershed feeds 40 million people, roots a third of Canada's GDP, and underlies hundreds of billions in U.S. salaries. Its shipping lanes from Duluth to Montreal move iron, ore, grain, and manufactured products that feed supply chains spanning Europe, Africa, and Asia. In addition to unsettling Canadians, Trump's threat of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement sent a message to international markets that even the most stable freshwater system in North America could become politicized. Investors are alarmed by that signal alone, which directs funds at areas that are viewed as more reliable. China and the European Union are already keeping a careful eye on things. According to reports, Beijing, which has historically prioritized protecting international resource corridors, is looking at making covert investments in Canadian water infrastructure in return for assurances of future supplies. Policymakers in Brussels are drafting trade frameworks that present Canada as a possible agricultural water backstop in light of the drought in southern Europe. These scenarios may seem far-fetched or unrealistic to many Americans, but history demonstrates how swiftly markets can change once a resource is politicized. Few people thought that oil could be used as a weapon in the 1970s until the OPEC embargo abruptly changed the world order. Water has the same potential today. In addition to upholding Canadian sovereignty, Carney's strong opposition to Trump has sent a message to the world that Canada is a sovereign water power with the right to control the course of its rivers. This reality reveals new vulnerabilities for the United States. U.S. industry may see rising costs and limited access if Canada fortifies its economic relations with Asia or Europe and directs its water resources toward resource-heavy exports. Climate change magnifies the risk. Droughts are expanding deeper into the American West. Aquifers are disappearing, and demand for water-intensive items like semiconductors and electric vehicle batteries is growing. Assuming automatic access to Canadian water in this situation is not only out of date, but dangerous. Washington's allies are also affected by the symbolic loss. Although military unity has long been a priority for NATO, resources are also important. The alliance loses credibility when a U.S. president publicly threatens a close friend over water. European politicians who were already skeptical of the United States' dependability are now even more so. What prevents Trump from using other agreements as weapons if he is prepared to destabilize Canada over rivers and lakes? At a time when Washington is attempting to oppose China in the Pacific and Russia in the Arctic, that view undermines its moral authority. The message is sobering at home. For a long time, Americans thought that their wealth of lakes and rivers protected them from the resource wars that cause instability in other areas. That notion is disproved by Trump's demand for Canadian water, which highlights how precarious American security has become. America's claim to global leadership is more precarious than most people think if it cannot ensure supplies within its own borders. The economic stakes go beyond farms and factories. Water shortage threatens America's competitiveness and the very technologies it supports for the future electric vehicle batteries, innovative semiconductors, hydrogen energy, all of which require huge water inputs. The United States runs a risk of lagging behind in competition for clean tech leadership. It should have an impact on jobs, exports, and its capacity to set global standards if it is unable to secure consistent flows while Canada and others lock in reserves. The picture overseas is bleak. From Berlin to Tokyo, Carney's disobedience is already provoking analysis. Ottawa's position is viewed in Europe as evidence that, with the support of strong resources, middle powers may oppose Washington. In Asia, where water concerns loom big, Canada is considered as a possible partner immune to U.S. mandates. For America's rivals, especially China, the dispute offers a chance to claim that U.S. power is diminishing and that the world should look elsewhere for stability. Perceptions change throughout time, but geopolitical maps may not. Trump's demand that Canada's rivers be treated like property and Carney's refusal to comply capture a new reality. Allies no longer guarantee U.S. deference. That view emboldens others, from Mexico exploring alternate trade routes to Arctic states recalibrating policies as melting ice reveals new waterways and riches. As resource areas and shipping corridors that were previously frozen quickly open to competition, the Arctic in particular is becoming a flashpoint. Trump's water demands have been used by Canada, which is large northern regions, to establish more authority over its natural resources. Carney's position makes it abundantly evident to Beijing and Moscow that Canada will protect its wealth despite pressure from Washington. This position reveals weaknesses for the United States. The idea that U.S. access to crucial resources is uncertain hurts its credibility when pressing partners to fight Russian or Chinese influence. Financial markets are also paying attention. International investors increasingly see the conflict as an indication of rising political risk in North America rather than just a bilateral quarrel. Slowing domestic investment and raising borrowing rates could result from a shift in capital flows away from the U.S. and toward Canadian infrastructure. Chicago water futures are already trading at high prices, indicating fear that politics and scarcity will collide outside of Washington's control. From this perspective, the water dispute between the United States and Canada involves much more than just rivers and lakes. Credibility, leadership, and the distribution of power in a world altered by resource shortages and climate change are all put to the test. Canada's refusal indicates that even America's closest partner will not capitulate when its sovereignty is assailed. The broader lesson for Washington is stark. The era of automatic obedience from allies is disappearing, and a new age of contested resources has begun. Looking ahead, the impasse is more than a short diplomatic spat. It might mark the opening chapter of a historic geopolitical conflict over North America's water. Generations will be impacted by decisions taken today. The future for the United States is dire unless tactics change. Trump's administration has been cornered by his hardline strategy, which treats Canadian rivers like a commodity up for auction. Washington will have to decide between escalating through tariffs, pursuing legal challenges, or attempting unilateral diversions if Ottawa remains steadfast. Every alternative is quite risky. Tariffs attract retaliation in lumber, steel, and energy, harming American consumers. International legal battles are lengthy and uncertain, and unilateral diversions, even if conceivable, would inflame tensions and risk open conflict with Canada. Canada's standing is improving in the meantime. Water is a sovereign asset, not a negotiating chip, as Carney has established. Future Canadian leaders will find it politically impossible to accede to American demands, since this idea is widely supported across the political spectrum. It is anticipated that Ottawa will strengthen federal safeguards for lakes and rivers, consolidating water management under a national framework built to withstand outside pressure. These restrictions would essentially lock the faucet, making future diversions more challenging if they were passed. The corporate community in the United States is already preparing for the consequences. Agribusiness cautions that crop failures may worsen in the absence of substitute sources. Executives from the IT and manufacturing sectors are advocating for significant federal funding for aquifer replenishment, wastewater recycling, and desalination solutions that already exist but take years to scale and trillions of dollars to implement. Until then, industries remain exposed and layoffs are expected to grow. Similar pressures apply to energy companies. Restricted hydropower flows could compel utilities to use fossil fuels more frequently, so jeopardizing America's commitments to the global environment. Alliances are changing as a result of the water dispute, with Canada emerging as a more self-assured and assertive nation, using its freshwater resources as a diplomatic tool. Canada is strengthening its relations with both Europe and Asia. Rumor has it that European negotiators may start looking for clauses pertaining to water in upcoming trade agreements with Ottawa and Brussels. Countries in Asia who are suffering from drought would view Canada as a long-term strategic ally, one that might provide investment in return for consistent access to Canadian agricultural exports. Each step in this approach strengthens Canada's standing as a major water power in the world and reduces Washington's influence. The stakes are immediate for regular Americans. Energy prices are going up, grocery expenditures are going up, and people's faith in Washington's capacity to provide answers is waning. If the issue is not resolved, there may be serious political repercussions. Voters in swing states that are connected to manufacturing, agriculture, and the Great Lakes may turn their annoyance into electoral backlash. Trump had pledged to use power to bring about prosperity, but his spat with Canada has revealed weakness instead, and time is running out. According to climate estimates, by 2030, a large portion of the U.S., the West, will see catastrophic, protracted droughts that have never been seen before. The United States will have to rely entirely on domestic conservation and technical solutions without Canadian assistance, which might be too expensive or time-consuming to stop widespread disruption. The future now rests on a clear decision: intensify conflict or shift toward cooperation and creativity. Ottawa's message is unambiguous. Just because Washington insists on it, Canada's water will not flow south. That rejection marks the beginning of a new age for the United States, one in which adaptation, rather than domination, will be necessary for survival, prosperity, and leadership. The water dispute has progressed beyond a private policy discussion. America's future is being shaped by a high-stakes conflict that makes headlines. Trump demanded Canadian rivers as if they were Washington's command. Carney refused, drawing a line that stunned U.S. officials and left the world watching. The repercussions are just getting started, and the shock is genuine. Thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.